So I'm going to cover a few things today. The state of ESG, where we are today. I thought it would be best covered through headlines because it's been in the news a lot today, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So I want to do that. I'm going to talk about the elements of ESG specifically from where they're managed within the company, because it might be helpful for you as someone looking at a career in the space to see how companies, where they position these things, how the work that's done in those spaces. And then what I think is the most interesting part is going through the career arcs of several folks that are in the room today, myself and several other speakers, and I'm really looking at a couple of my peers in the space as well. And one of the things that I really want to impress upon you, there is this coveted role in companies called head of ESG. Fortunately, there's only one of them, but there are hundreds of people within a large company that support that particular role. And so I really want to expand your mindset today to think about what is the type of work that you really want to do. What is the impact that you want to have? It might not necessarily be through that role. There's a lot of other things you can do. So we'll show how some people made their way to ESG, some people that might have what you think of as a non-traditional role of ESG that I really want you to think about as an ESG role. So I want to start with a definition of ESG just to center us all. This is my definition. Every company thinks about something slightly different depending on how they do the work. So in my mind, ESG is just business, and it's how you do business. And it's how you do business by embedding environmental, social, and ethical considerations into the day-to-day operations and fabric of your company, supported by a strong governance structure that is led by your board and the senior executives of the company, the care and duty that they have to take care of the stakeholders of that company. Notice I didn't say shareholders, said stakeholders, employees, their customers, larger communities, supply chain, etc. All goes into that. Because this is just business, or it should just be business, it unfortunately is kind of a new way of doing business. And so companies haven't yet fully integrated this into the day-to-day practice. And so they still have, they're still talking about things as ESG. I think you'll start to see that term go away over time. I think, I'm hoping, this is my hope, that it just becomes every startup that comes into the chain will just start from day one figuring out what their carbon footprint is and how they have to measure it, if they've got a plan for hiring, for diversity, and creating an equitable, inclusive experience. But for now, it is becoming a political punching bag, which is unfortunate. And we're seeing that in a lot of the headlines today. I think I read that half of the states in the United States have some type of anti-ESG legislation that's either in progress right now. I think maybe states like Florida have actually put some stuff in place, but there's a lot of stuff happening on the political front right now. There's a lot of stuff happening with really wealthy investors. If you've got enough money, you can actually, and you own enough shares of the company, you can actually lobby a proposal against that company. And you can insist that they engage with you on that particular issue. And if it's against, if you don't want to see them with a climate plan, or you think their policies are too woke, you can actually use your dollars to force that company to come to the table and have a conversation with you around that. Or if you're one of the wealthiest people in the world, you can actually put a tweet out that says, that ESG is a scam, and the hundreds of millions or however many millions of followers that you have don't even know what ESG is. They just now know it's a scam because they love you and they think that you're amazing. And so this is the struggle that we're in right now. It's a very PR kind of hearts and mind type of struggle that we're going through. And it's been generated by powerful forces that are either on the political or the financial side that don't want to see a more equitable environment, that don't want to see us taking care of our climate commitments. It's threatening on many levels to folks. And so they are going to work as hard as they can to keep pushing this agenda. But how are companies and how are investors and how are consumers responding to this, I think is completely different. On the corporate side, companies are still doing the work. They're just doing the work, but they're green hushing. They're not talking about the work that they're doing right now. They're not shouting it from the rooftops like they used to. They've just decided they're going to quietly kind of get the stuff done. They're still hiring for people. They're still very much staffing up in this area, but they've decided that they don't want to use the same PR engines that they used to when touting all the work that they're doing. I love this Mr. Humboldt's article because if you go to the webpage that used to be about their ESG approach and progress, they just literally took ESG away and kept all the content the same. So now it's just a business conversation, right? It's just a business conversation, and that is what it should be. Let's think about a future post ESG if we can get there. It's going to take a while, but it'd be great if we could get there. The conference board research, super helpful as well. Just seeing that companies are just, continuing to do the work. Really, very few are kind of stepping back on their program. Your allergy season is hitting me very hard when I hit the ground here, so I apologize for all the snuffling and extra water consumption. On the investor side of things, from the NVIDIA perspective, I talk to investors all the time and constantly reaching out to us, wanting to know more about our climate plan. What are we doing on the DE&I front? And they're staffing up massively with ESG analysts, building these whole monitoring and evaluation systems for all the companies that they want to invest in. They're not relying solely on all the third-party research that's out there, all the surveys that us heads of ESG have to do to talk about all of our programs. They're actually building their own internal measuring infrastructure. On the larger investor side, that's the institutional side, the State Streets, the Vanguards, the BlackRocks, etc. But in general, these funds that these companies have put together are doing incredibly well. Now, ESG funds are only about 8% of the total assets under management, so it's still a very small space, but the returns, McKinsey said, or Morgan Stanley said, at the first half of this year were 6.9% compared to 3.8% for non-ESG type funds. So very powerful. People are talking with their investment dollars as to what they, where they want to see their money go for a more sustainable future. And I love these last two headlines because it's not, I really honestly, this was newsworthy to me because I was not aware that private equity firms and the mergers and acquisition departments within companies have actually started implementing ESG criteria when they're looking at companies to acquire or to invest in. It's fantastic that this is actually happening. And according to this, to ICSP, some of these deals get canceled because they can't make, so companies are deeply concerned about bringing in a new company into the fold and worrying that it's going to be a reputational risk or a financial issue for them. So that was a super good thing to see. And that actually means that because private equity goes into companies of all sizes, M&A happens at companies of all sizes, but typically the acquiree is usually, or the investee is a smaller company, which means that ESG, there's pressure now for medium and smaller businesses to start having ESG initiatives, where for many, many years, it was kind of in the area for the largest companies. How are consumers responding? Well, consumers love messages with ESG related claims. We could do a whole nother talk on how good those claims are, but there is some legislation that's coming from Europe. I think they're calling it a green claims rule or something that requires companies, and this would be even U.S. companies that sell, any company that sells into the EU, that's going to need to actually talk about their footprint, the footprint of their product and the efforts that they're doing to for it to be a greener product. But for now, consumers really want to feel that they're part of something bigger when they're buying their everyday products. So they're interested in these messages. Those companies are benefiting from that. They're seeing more growth. The KPMG and the PwC research, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, right? You guys are a little different. You're like a subset within this group because you've already decided that you want to apply your kind of head and heart to the work that you do. But your general employee, whether it's like an engineer or finance manager, has decided that they more often than not want to find a company that matches their values and what they're really interested in. So good news overall. So a little bit of a roller coaster ride, the kind of gloom and doom of the state that we're currently in, really how the real world's kind of responding to that. I'm going to take you back down again because we have so much work to do. It is very scary. I think a recent report from Accenture said that only 7% of companies were really on track to make their climate commitments. And so it's a big deal. You're going to hear from some amazing companies today that are doing incredible things in this space. So when I say companies, I obviously don't mean every company. I am kind of generalizing in some cases. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, if you've not heard of those, 17 different criteria from a social and environmental perspective to think through how we can make progress as a society, both governments and companies. These goals are, I can't remember if they were started in 2015 or 2020, 2015, I think, yeah. So 2030 is their kind of end goal to see can we make a certain amount of progress in that area. Only 15% of the different indicators under each of these 17 areas has there been any demonstrable progress. So it's a lot of work that needs to be done. And even some of these early spaces, I know it's weird to look at an oil company thinking about them as an early leader in the environmental sustainability or the fashion industry, because fast fashion has become such a thing. But these companies were there originally, some of the first industries starting to look at carbon, and they don't even have it down yet either, despite how much longer they've been in the tech industry, or maybe some other big industries or not. This last article, I encourage you to check it out. This is the clickbaity thing that drives me nuts about headlines, is that this looks like a horrible article, but it's really just saying that let's just get rid of the term, right? The work is critical. Everyone in the article agrees that the work is critical, but let's just get rid of the term. Let's just do business, basically. And so what does this mean for you? I want to bring you back up. Don't want to end on a bad note, certainly. I mean, I think it's an amazing time to go out into the world. Not only do companies need you badly, but there's just so much growth in this space, and there's so many imperatives to figure out some of these social and environmental issues that we're struggling with. And coming in with that fresh perspective and thinking that you are all doing in that passion and desire to make a change and do business completely differently than previous generations have, I think is just going to be, businesses are so lucky to have you when you get out there finally, and you start seeing that. So wanted to leave you with some fantastic business publications with some really good news. I'm not going to go into all of the elements of ESG. I really want to talk about these from where they're managed in the company, just to give you an idea if that is not an area you've gone into deeply yet. On the environmental side, you typically have your own footprint. That's turning your lights off and on, your heating and your cooling, your data centers, if you need those to run your business. And then if that's your operational footprint, usually run out of your facilities organizations, your real estate organizations. If you manufacture your products, that all gets taken care of in this bucket too. But if not, a lot of people leverage supply chains. So I know at NVIDIA, we had an extensive supply chain. We just basically created a blueprint, and everyone else made the products, and then everyone else sold the products. And so we had a very sophisticated supply chain that we needed to monitor to ensure that there were no human rights or environmental abuses while our products were being designed. So that gets done out of the supply chain or operations organization. Depends on the company, is it software, is it hardware, is it a clothing product or a edible product, or is it a hard piece of hardware you plug into the wall. And then that third piece is how much energy your product uses. And for many things, like if you're buying food, packaging is usually the thing there, that kind of leftover waste product. If you're plugging something into the wall, how much energy does it use? How are you addressing that? So these are all footprints that need to be addressed within a typical company. And that last one typically gets done in the engineering departments or the product department, again, depending on what the product is. So operations, facilities, engineering are kind of where a lot of the E stuff lives. On the social side, you take care of your people, you take care of your supply chain. I'm glad you agree. You take care of your communities, and your communities could be a couple different things, right? There's a lot of work around charitable giving and volunteerism as a way to get your employees to kind of to accelerate any impact you want to have in your community. But there's also the fact that you might have big campuses in a little town, or big campuses in a big town. Whatever is going on, there's a lot. If you're impacting the city in some way, either through the government or the people that live there, you will have people in the company that should be creating a relationship, typically based out of government affairs or corporate affairs, ensuring that you're a welcome citizen in that town, and that you're taking responsibility for any of your impacts in that area. The community engagement piece, the charitable and volunteerism piece can be run out of many different groups. Sometimes it's in HR, sometimes it's in marketing, depending on whether there's a strong kind of messaging or a cause marketing component to it. And also, it can be done out of that government affairs, public affairs group as well. The majority of this work about the people, right? How do you attract the most talented user base? How do you engage them? How do you want them to stay? Video used to say we want to be a place where people can do their life's work, right? And actually, they used to say I'm not there anymore. So have to remember that. So that is, that work is typically created in the HR department. It is generated and run by the HR department. But if you're doing it right, it should seep out into every part of the company. So whether you're that engineering manager or that finance manager, you actually should know how to hire with an eye towards creating the most diverse employee set that you can in a particular area. You should be given tools to manage through a lens of inclusivity and equity when it comes time for pay and promotions, and as well as training and development. You don't just have people in there and not want to continue to build their skills and have them move around the company. So lots of HR stuff in there. The human rights and fair labor practices work that gets done in the supply chain, typically done through the operations or supply chain team, and depending on the companies. Product responsibility often gets done in that group too. Could be done in engineering, but these are things like trying to remember some of the acronyms for product responsibility. So making sure that there's no chemical RoHS, just look to Tonie. RoHS, for example, restriction and hazardous substances, making sure that some countries will ban certain chemicals that you can use in your products, for example. So that's an area of that. Safety is another thing. You don't want your products catching fire when they're plugged in. So that's another issue. That is part of the ESG. And then finally, the governance piece. So the board, care and duty, fiduciary responsibility of the company, protecting it for all the stakeholders that have a vested interest in that company. How is the board composed? This was the #1 question that we got from investors, right? They wanted us to do more around having a diverse board. We've got a diverse board, we've got diverse mindset, and there's pressure from the very top of the company to make sure that that ethos gets embedded into all hiring decisions all throughout the company. So board composition, super critical. Things like intellectual property, business value, and ethics compliance. All of these things are kind of typically managed by legal. And the last 3 that you're seeing here that have the ESG labels on them, I'm starting to see that move into legal, basically, especially with regulations coming. Legal teams are realizing that the types of disclosures that they're going to have to do with their public companies, at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission level, they are going to need they're going to need to meet the quality and the standards that typical financial reporting does every quarter. In which case, legal wants ownership of that. They want to know that it's being done properly, as well in partnership with finance as well. So if there's any of you with an interest in finance, this is going to be a super hot space over the next few years. While companies, the other challenge of regulations, even though they're going to be incredibly helpful because they're forcing. But a lot of companies that might be on that edge, they're looking for more, might take a step back and decide, like, we need to get right with these regulations before we can do anything else. So I'm a little worried from a practitioner perspective that there'll be a little bit of stalled progress while everyone's trying to get up to speed with these regulations. The US, I think, are going to be hard. The EU is incredibly difficult. The amount of work that's going to be needed for a typical, larger company that's doing US company that's doing business, a certain amount of business in Europe, will be beholden to some incredible legislation. So where all the stuff gets managed, how it's thought of, how it interacts within the company. Obviously, if you're over on the ESG side, no matter where you are, I was in marketing for 14 years because it was a practice that was built from the ground up, and I was initially moved into marketing because we wanted to tell a better story around our strategic giving work. But as I started doing more of the ESG stuff, I started interacting more with a lot of the executives in the company. By the end of my time there, the last 3 to 4 years, I was in frequent contact with CFO, chief legal counsel, and the head of HR, almost on a regular basis, driving initiatives with them reporting and making sure that they kind of understood, what was happening largely within the company for those particular areas. So I'm going to go through several people's career arcs, because I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there around how people can even find their roles and how they address those roles. When I was little, I used to travel all around with my mom, and I used to think that resorts and all these places we would stay at were so glamorous. From like back in the day, I wanted to be a manager, like some resort in the Bahamas or something like that. So when the time came to figure out what to do for school, I did a business degree, but I did it with a hotel tourism kind of slant. And I got into that space. I was working at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, planning these big medical conferences and client events, employee events. And then I realized that there was very limited access to kind of the top of that organization. It was very restrictive. So I went to business school. And while I was in business school, I was introduced to tech a little bit later than a lot of my peers who were working in tech today. It wasn't until the late 90s, but an alumni of the school who was working on the board, of a tech company, came in to do a presentation to one of my classes. And I was just mesmerized by the story of like what's going to happen in the future around, there's going to be this device in your house where you're going to be able to order a pizza from it and pay your bills from it. I mean, this is 25 years ago, so bear with us. Okay, you're like, all right, that's my phone, whatever. That was an amazing thing for someone who was just plugging into the technology side of things. So I did that for a number of years, and the company that I interned with actually hired me 6 months later. And 2 months after that, they were acquired by a bigger company. 2 months after that, our big company merged with another big company. And a year after that, it all fell apart. And it was the dot-com bust, which you probably have read about in your case studies and so forth. So I stuck around a little bit longer in technology marketing, but like you, I was looking for that sync up of head and heart. I just didn't want to work and do business as usual anymore. I have mad respect for every other position within a company, but I just wanted something that was different. I was out with a couple of girlfriends one night, and one of them had said to me, I'm working for this nonprofit, and I raise money from all these big companies in Silicon Valley. And I noticed that when I go into these companies, there are people in this company that have a job that do nothing but give money away to charity. And I said, that is the most amazing job on the planet. And my friend Michelle, sitting next to me, said, my husband Scott is hiring for that role on NVIDIA. So literally 3 weeks later, in for an interview, and the rest is history. So lesson number one from there is, when you know what you want to do, or even if you don't, you got to talk about it with everybody. Because if I hadn't brought that up that night, I would not be, absolutely would not be here right now. So when I came in, it was community giving, it was internal communications, or employee communications. I did both of those for a year and a half. It turns out they were both full-time jobs, and I was kind of sucking at both of them, doing them full-time. So I got rid of the internal comms stuff, but I was hired because of my marketing background, because of my communications background. They didn't care that I had given money to charity or didn't know how to harness thousands of employees to, do stuff in the community. So I started going to conferences to learn about that stuff. And that's when I learned about CSR, corporate social and environmental responsibility, the predecessor to ESG. And I was hooked. That was really the tap into that work that I wanted to do, combined with my business background. And so I went back into the company and did a little assessment and realized that we hadn't built our supply chain responsibility program yet. We were just getting started with climate. We hadn't done our internal or external diversity programs yet. So I had an opportunity to work with some amazing subject matter experts within the company to help build those programs over several years within the company. I left at the beginning of the summer. The program's reached a level of maturity. I'm really a builder. I'm looking to go back to my roots and find kind of a smaller company to start some of this stuff over with, or maybe do some consulting. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but that's a kind of a peek into my art. So in addition to the, talking to everyone about what you want to do, you can find a company that you love and does amazing work. And when you're interviewing with them, you can find out from them how far along are they with their ESG practice. And then you get in there and you build it. You don't have to be hired as a head of ESG. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but this is, not every company realizes they need to be on this path, but they need to be on this path. And you can be the one to help them figure that out, right? At an amazing company. Dr. Griffith is going to be speaking on the S in a little while. And Glenn actually ended up started out doing a lot of work in engineering and technology planning, moved into product marketing and advertising, ended up at Sirius XM, where he was doing some product management, raised his hand to be one of the leaders of an employee resource group there for Black and African American employees. And he was able to parlay that into a role at Sirius XM, make a case to that company as to why this work that he had been doing as a volunteer was work that was worth having a full-time dedicated job for. And then just fairly recently solidified that with a vice president role of equity and inclusion and diversity at Dallas Symphony Orchestra, and also gets to do some social impact work as well. So, you know, again, going in, figuring out what's there, leveraging the heck out of it to get you to those next areas. Didn't start out in ESG either. Tonie's here in the front row. He's going to be on the E panel. I love Tonie's background. He's like pure play environmental person. And so from my perspective, like I wanted to show not just, you know, people who came into it from marketing and all these other things, but from day one has really been having an impact in environmental business development, in sustainability. He was head of sustainability for a while, decided that he wanted to expand and went over to UC Berkeley to do some teaching there as well, executive in residence, and then decided after working at Dow for I think probably most of his environmental career, went into and he's doing consulting now, and then adding some of that advisory role, some of those board member roles, things that you'll have opportunities to do, and we'll probably add to your career at some point in the future as well. So there may be an area where you just want to go deep into it because you know it so well, either you know from your undergrad or it's an expertise you want to start to develop now. So it's just a different way of doing work. Do you want to be an absolute expert in one thing? Or do you want to kind of know a lot about a bunch of different things? That's really going to direct the type of work that you pursue. My friend Diane, I call Diane the OG of ESG. When I started, she had already been doing this for a really long time. In her world, in her family, nonprofit leadership was kind of the ethos in the company. So starting out in her career, she actually was a nonprofit executive director for the American Heart Association, one of their affiliates in Texas. Close to Texas, yeah, I was there at some point. And then wanted to go more into the business world, and so she helped to lead an organization called Entrepreneurs Foundation, and it was doing something really rare at the time. It was working with big companies like NVIDIA. We brought them in to help us design our social impact programs, but at the same time, she was working with startups, like long before it was on the agenda for startups to even be thinking about this and how they could think from day one about building social impact strategies into their programs. She decided she wanted to go further in-house. She went to a little company called Google, and she got to run their employee giving and volunteerism program for a number of years. And while she was that function was positioned in HR, which is fairly unique, but she got to direct hundreds of thousands of employees, I think at that point, with all of their money and helping them double their impact through the company's initiatives as well. But out of HR, she kind of got the people done. And so I still firmly believe that Diane is doing an ESG job based in HR. She has done diversity and inclusion. She's done engagement, culture, change management. She's going to talk about her journey a little bit later during the S panel today. But I'm going to argue vociferously that Diane is still doing an ESG job, which is different than what you may be thinking about. Two more people I want to go through. This is my friend Effie. Effie and I met at an environmental leadership development program about 17 years ago. She ended up going to Microsoft. I did the NVIDIA route. She had a sustainability background, but she ended up developing a passion and kind of a subject matter expertise in supply chain. As an electronics company, a lot of us don't manufacture. We need to make sure that our products are being built with the utmost of safety conditions for the people who are building those products, and as well as working hours are not excessive, that they're not paying fees to third-party firms to get them gigs at our suppliers. There's a lot of complexity in countries that are, if you manufacture outside of the United States and you happen to manufacture in a country that does not have good human rights record, then that is something that you need to really, pay attention to. So in addition to doing this work in Microsoft, she actually was one of the foundational people that created the foundation of this organization called Responsible Business Alliance. And it's 100+ electronics companies that have made a commitment to follow a code of conduct and an auditing protocol for all of our supply chains to make sure that we are minimizing these human rights and environmental issues. So when I checked in with her, and she's done responsible sourcing, which is around the mining of all these minerals that come out of the ground that get smelted into metals that go into these technologies that we need so badly. There's a ton of complexity in that area as well. When I checked in with her a few months ago, she is her first CEO gig at a biodiversity startup called Context Nature. She's working with a couple of folks. I think they were former Microsoft people too. Thank you. They actually are kind of a matchmaking service. I'm grossly simplifying the work that they're doing. They're finding biodiversity projects that companies and governments can invest in. And I skipped over the biodiversity stuff when we have the ESG on the board, but this area is going to be so incredibly hot. I mean, right now the goals that most companies have out there are around just kind of trying to stop the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. There is not a ton of above and beyond going on. I mean, those goals could be better, right? And biodiversity is one of the ways that we can replenish all that we have destroyed. Flora, fauna, ecosystems, all of that work that can be done in that area. So biodiversity frameworks have been recently created, and it's called the Task Force for Nature Related Financial Disclosures, or TNFD. I think TCFD you might know from a climate perspective. And Europe is coming down with regulation, I believe, too, over the next few years. So that's going to be a big area as well. And I'm going to wrap with something a little different. This is my colleague Kimberly, who is still at NVIDIA. She's the healthcare business lead there. So Kimberly started out as an engineer. She's always been in healthcare. She was in hardware engineering. She went back and got a little executive ed experience in product design. And had worked at two other, I think they were kind of like healthcare hardware companies, like device type of things. And then she came to NVIDIA to build our healthcare business. Basically, we needed an engineering skill set. She's a salesperson. She's business development and salesperson, essentially, working with Siemens and GE and major hospitals and research facilities all over the world. The application of NVIDIA's technology greatly accelerates diagnostics, treatment and care in the healthcare space. So when you go and get some kind of imaging done these days, the fact that it is faster, the fact that the detail of it is incredible, and the fact that you're getting a lower radiation dose are all kind of thanks to that technology and the work that she's been driving. She just happened to be there when the AI wave kicked in, went back into that massive customer base that she had helped to create and brought that message, and is creating even more powerful solutions that will impact all of us. So Kimberly doesn't wake up in the morning to go to her ESG job. At least she doesn't think of it that way, right? But this is an ESG job, right? So it's just something different to think about, right? Really want to get you outside of, and I know that many of you are already there, but I just really want to underscore, as someone who came to this from a completely different spot, you have the value of starting from day one in your, possibly in your work experience in ESG. But for those of us who found our way here, really just want to think about a lot of creativity around that. So as we go through the rest of today, I'm going to leave with just some questions for you. I just recently, we're always learning, right? I just completed 25 hours of executive coaching training. And so I'm figuring out what is to coach. Coach is all about asking questions of folks, right? So I want to make sure that these are some of the questions I wanted to ask of you today. How do you want to do the work? What is the impact that you want to have? If it's not that head of ESG role, what else could it be? I'm a generalist, Tonie's a specialist. What sounds appealing to you? What is really resonating with you that you're hearing? And then what can you take away today that you can start, even if you're not working yet, what can you start thinking about that will change how you're doing this? Thank you.
What advice do you have for selling your skill set when you're switching industries or jobs?
Oh, great question. I wonder if I know who's submitted that. There is a set of skills in addition to like calculating carbon footprints and auditing suppliers and all of that ESG work. There are so many business skills that I would encourage you to add right now to or to just think about kind of positioning, right? So the number one skill that I use is influence. And when I understood in the early days at NVIDIA that we weren't doing a particular thing, we weren't monitoring our supply chain as closely as we needed to, I didn't immediately go to that executive and ask for something. I figured out what was happening on the ground because I knew at the end of the day, those people that I was talking to, those were going to be the ones that were going to be implementing the work, right? And I didn't want to be this person coming in and with my big ESG agenda and like landing on them and suddenly giving them more work to do. So it's really that level of being able to influence and get people to see that what you're bringing to them is something that they're going to feel good about, right? It's going to be extra work for them. They're not going to get paid for it, but it's actually something that they're going to be doing good that way. And everyone really, I mean, at some point, everyone does really want to tap into that, but also being able to influence executives as well. I think that's really, really critical. I think Deanna's going to talk a lot more about skills, so I don't really want to go too much into that. Just wanted to get that one out because that one is most important. But in terms of the selling, it's that business and that practical work experience as well that I think is really critical.
Right. I have another one. When you're looking at the supply chains, considering human rights improvements and different locations, do you send out auditors or do people from your own company go? And then what kind of data are you getting to validate what you're getting?
Yeah, sure. So the best way to do this is that hopefully the industry that you're in has some type of consortium. So this Responsible Business Alliance is a consortium of 100+ companies. They have together created a code of conduct of how we aspire to having our supply chains operate, and then we've got that auditing mechanism. So you typically would send in a third-party group because you're likely not going to hire auditing skills into your company. And there's financial auditors and all that stuff, but you'll bring in people that do nothing but know how to go onto the floor of an assembly area and figure out whether there's enough cushioning on the floor and whether they're not, cocking their heads in an odd angle all day while they're doing the work, that they've got breaks, that there's education opportunities for them, that they haven't paid any fees to, some person that promised them a job at this company, right? So there's a lot of different things that need to be looked at. So that all becomes an auditing protocol that gets executed by these third parties, and then you hire them to do that work for you. And often it's better to have that as well because it's a tremendous amount of work for an individual company, but because a lot of us share auditors in all industries, in the electronics industry especially, but in all industries, there's a lot of sharing of suppliers, excuse me, I meant to say suppliers we share. Having that same auditor, kind of go in to that same area, it just creates a lot of simplicity, I think, in making sure that they're asking the right questions for that. So the data that we get back is basically kind of a heat map of where that auditor thinks there's issues in that particular area. So for the electronics industry, working hours come up because for our China-based suppliers, you've got workers that are coming in that don't necessarily need to have a technology background or a degree that are doing a lot of assembly work, and they want to work for hours and hours and hours because this is an opportunity for them to capitalize on that time and then bring what they've made back to the villages, support their family and so forth. And so you have to actually make sure that you monitor that. There's no more than 60 hours a week of work. They would work more than 60 hours a week. It's not good for their health. Okay, great. All right. Thanks, everyone.